We have the first century street, and here we have the city of David and the temple looming in the background. And fly up. There's the altar in front of the temple. And this is the lower court with the steps where the tables were, where Jesus would have overturned the tables and driven out the animals. And I'm going to fly up on top of the temple to get a good overview. We see Fort Antonio coming into view in the background. You could accommodate a full legion and auxiliary. Now we have the north court of the temple, and Solomon's porch, and the women's court. And this is the lower court with the royal stoa. And there's the Red Heifer Bridge going to the Mount of Olives. And these are the two bridges or colonnades that connected the temple to Fort Antonia. Behind here we have Robinson's Arch Gate. Josephus wrote that the temple was a furlong by a furlong, 600 by 600 feet. In the middle of the south wall was a double gate, double the width of the first temple era gate. Before entering the temple, one must immerse in water. At the base of the Ophel Hill are the ruins of a huge mikveh, a pool, built by the Herodians. At the far end are arches that supported the steps above them. Josephus, a Jewish historian of the time, describes many sets of steps to get from the south gate to the men's court, which tells us the southern court was built on a hill. At the end of this platform was the Herodian open-aired courthouse, judging by the ruins in that area. This is the porch of the gate, and Josephus writes that the side rooms of the gate were built like towers. The gate enters into the royal stoa, a covered mall of sorts. The stoa was 600 feet long by 105 feet and around 75 feet tall. It was full of shops and buildings and lots of activity. Hundreds of artifacts from the stoa were discovered by Benjamin Mazar right here on the Ophel. Makes sense since this is where it once stood. Some of the shops were money changers and others sold doves or pigeons, and others needs pertaining to sacrifice. On a day like Passover, we would make a peace offering which required purchasing a lamb. The soreg was a fence in which no Gentile could enter. Signs were posted at the entrance to this area. When caught, they would be to blame for their own death. After purchasing a lamb, the men would make their way to the men's court, located on the threshing floor of King David. These huge ancient steps, which are on the Ophel today, were cut into bedrock and led to the upper gate. According to Josephus, the steps had a rise of 22 feet because the temple was built on a higher part of the hill. These ancient steps on the Ophel just happened to have a rise of 22 feet. Most likely one would have said a psalm on each level of the 14 large steps. Josephus tells us that at the top was a flat walkway, the kel, a walkway that went all the way around the sacred area, which was the temple, priest, men's, and women's courts. This is Doublegate on the map. Josephus tells us that there were marble steps where people could rest in the shade. This is our first view of the temple. The porch was 100 feet tall and 100 feet wide. One could see the veil of the Holy of Holies from here. On the left was an altar, and on the right were rings for tying the animals, racks for hanging the carcasses, and tables for cutting up the sacrifices. Once receiving a sacrificed lamb, it is time to pay the temple tax in the women's court. This pedestal is where Solomon addressed the people. 13 treasuries hung from 13 of the columns to drop the money in, but I represented this with boxes. This court had a gate to the south and a gate to the north. Solomon called this court the outer court. Women could not go beyond this court. In fact, women had to go up into the balconies during a celebration when men were dancing. They were not allowed to dance together. From here, the women could watch the activities below. We can see the Nicanor gate with the temple behind it. The doors of the gate were so large that it took 20 priests to open each one of them. The women's court had 4 courtyards in its corners, one for sorting wood in the northeast corner. The southeast corner was for the Nazarenes, the southwest corner for oil, and the northwest courtyard had a mikveh where lepers were healed were washed. This mikveh is still below the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It was photographed in 1927 by Hamilton. This is the threshing floor of King David. The labor would be filled each morning through a hole cut into the floor. Charles Warren's map shows that there is a water channel ending here with a large pool right next to where I believe the temple house was located. Is this a coincidence? Beyond the north court of the temple complex was Fort Antonia. Josephus speaks of a small strip of land between the temple and the fort where a battle took place. It had 2 bridges connecting to the temple at the west and north walls. Josephus records that Herod built a 4.5-foot wall on the highest part of the hill, filled it in, and there he built Fort Antonio on every part of it. This is the rock under the Dome of the Rock shrine. This gigantic platform was originally built by Herod. Wilson's Gate was actually a military gate. The arches leading up to this gate went all the way to Herod's palace on the top of the West Hill, and it also contained the aqueduct that entered the Temple Mount here. Barclay's Gate is to the left, and in the distance is the stepped bridge of Robinson's Arch. Its gate entered the upper court west of the temple house. This must have been a beautiful bridge. Above is the place of the trumpeting stone located on the southwest corner of the upper courts. The priests blew the trumpet at the beginning and end of the Sabbath and for celebrations. Below is where the trumpeting stone landed when it was pushed over, cracking the pavement as it hit the first-century street. This area is where I believe that the animals were brought into the temple. It was under tons of stones and rubbish for nearly 2,000 years until the excavation under Benjamin Mazar around 1994. This revealed a small arch in the wall opposite the southwest corner of the Temple Mount. I believe this is where the red heifer and also the young bulls were brought in. The alley also revealed a metal brace which held up a roof. I believe we could follow this alley to where the sheep and goats entered the lower court. These corrals would have needed to be washed down throughout the day because of the thousands of animals coming through in just a single day. Small sewage channels would have connected to the drains of the city drainage ditch. The southern court was the last court to be extended by the Herodians. It was completed around 65 and destroyed in 70 AD. The bases of these columns on the stoa from the steps eastward can still be seen in a row on the oval today. From here we leave the temple by the south gate. Please visit the TempleMountLocation.com for more information. Thank you. Welcome to Herod's Temple, Part 3. Entering the temple through the beautiful East Gate. On the east side of the oval hill there was another way to enter the temple complex. It was called the King's Entrance because this is how King Solomon entered the temple from the south. His palace was once located here. Josephus tells us that the Herodians had no regard for the old ruins of Solomon's palace when they extended the southern court, digging up the ruins and laying the new foundation stones on the bedrock. Elat Mazar has excavated up to this wall and declared that it was once the entrance to Solomon's royal area. Herod built a huge above-ground mikveh, an immersion pool, east of here on the oval, because this entrance was still in use at that time and called Solomon's Porch. Jesus walked and taught in Solomon's Porch, and later the early church also met here. These doorways represent two of the three arches of Triple Gate on Warren's map. Triple Gate is exactly 600 feet from the west wall of the Temple Mount. According to James Barclay, who explored Triple Gate in 1844, all of the stone columns in Triple Gate can be dated back to the time of Solomon as the builder. Josephus recorded that Solomon built retaining walls east of the temple, filled it in, and built his porch opposite the temple. Solomon used 50 by 30 cubits of the porch for his seat of judgment, where he held court to judge the innocent from the guilty. A huge square stone is still there where his throne may have sat. In the west wall of Triple Gate, Warren discovered an 18-foot lintel of a gate where the east gate would have been located in my theory. Men and women of high standing entered through the east gate. However, other women entered by an opening cut right into the wall. Today, Triple Gate is full of tons of rubble nearly up to the arches. Directly east of the east gate would have been the Red Heifer Bridge, which connected Solomon's Porch to the Mount of Olives, spanning the Kidron Valley. The red heifer was taken over the bridge for sacrifice on the Mount of Olives. People coming from the east would use this bridge to get to the temple. From here, one could see the veil of the Holy of Holies. This gate and porch were built 1,000 years before Herod by Solomon as his royal stoa, like an open-aired covered mall. Gentiles were allowed in this porch. Much teaching and buying and selling took place here. The east gate was offset to the south by 20 cubits, because when Herod rebuilt the temple, he increased the size of the women's court and the temple court by 20 cubits towards the north, to make room for the larger porch of his temple. And yet he left the east gate untouched. We are walking through the women's court back into the east gate and Solomon's porch. The western arch of the triple arches in the south wall has a Herodian cornerstone. It exited back out into the kell of the southern court, where Herod's royal stoa was located. In the ruins on the Ophel, there is a row of buildings here. There was. I built them into workplaces, such as the first one was for the preparation of gefilte fish. The last one I decided would be a synagogue, but we'll continue down into the stoa and enter the synagogue from the main door. Water was plentiful because of the aqueduct, bringing water from Edom Springs near Bethlehem. In the corner, I built a kitchen. I also built chambers along the south wall, much like Ezekiel's temple will have. We are entering the fenced area again called the Soreg. If a Gentile went past this fence, then they were to blame for their own death. This is the synagogue. A synagogue was a place of worship and study. Perhaps there was one built in the temple complex, or perhaps not, but I felt there would have been. I'm sure I will be corrected if there wasn't. From here, we can leave the temple by the south gate where I began this video, with a nice little stroll through the stoa. Welcome to part 4 of the video tour of Herod's Temple in 3D. Walking up the Herodian step street to the temple began with the purification ritual at the 1st century immersion pool at the south end of the city of David. Below the street was a city drainage ditch. From here we could also enter through the south gate. The stepped bridge, called Robinson's Arch, looms overhead. This led to an upper gate and the new western court of the temple complex. There had never been a western court before this time. The kell now went all the way around the sacred area. Prior to this, it was just a path on the edge of the Tyropolian Valley, created for animals to be brought into the lower court of the first and second temples. There were no western gates in Solomon's temple. Shalom. This building, with the tunnel and steps leading up to it, is still in existence today, buried below ground level of the Temple Mount. It was made into a cistern. However, I believe it was the holding place for animals to be purchased on the upper court, a barn of sorts. Back on the Kell, on the north side, on the left, we see the priest quarters. This building sticking out into the Kell was called the Chamber of the Hearth, because it had a hearth to warm oneself after immersing into the cold underground mikveh. This mikveh connected to a branch of the aqueduct. I believe this mikveh is among the ruins below the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The priests could also sleep in this room on cold nights on the steps to warm themselves at the hearth. This building was half on the Kell and half on the temple court. Here we are on the priest's court, where no one was allowed except the priests. The temple had two rooms, the holy place, and beyond the veil was the Holy of Holies, which was only entered once a year by the high priest. The temple had a large golden menorah, the altar of incense, and the table of the showbread, which was overlaid with gold. It had 12 loaves of bread representing the 12 tribes. Sadly, I can only represent these items with what is allowed to me in this program. In the northeast corner was a door to the side chambers. They went all the way around the northwest and south walls of the temple. They were 3 stories high and were used for storage and study. Solomon's altar was smaller and had steps, where Herod's had a ramp, but I can only make steps in this program. Many lambs could be roasted at one time on the large altar. The 3 buildings were where the hides were salted and tanned and stretched. There was a small building with a trap door leading down to the hollows below the temple. The steps were cut into bedrock. In the distance, we can see the pool cut into the court for filling the laver, with the aqueduct ending in a pool, and the mikveh below the chamber of the hearth. Also, the rock-cut blood channel going down to the drainage ditch deep below. Herod's new western court had rows and rows of these huge arches supporting the floor above. The Sanhedrin also met on the temple court. Within this building was a mikveh on the roof. This is one of the two mikvahs the high priest bathed in as part of his daily ritual of purification. I created a small building with steps leading up to the place of the trumpeting that Josephus spoke of. Here the priest blew the trumpet on the Sabbath, when it began and when it ended, and for celebrations. From here we exit by the stepped bridge back down to the first century street. Welcome to part 5, the last video in this series on Herod's Temple. In this video series, I have talked about how the animals were brought into the southern lower court, but there's still more to discover. How did the tens of thousands of animals in just one day like Passover get from the gates in the Nehemiah city wall, the sheep gate and the mikveh gate, all the way around to the lower court? And how did that path for the animals change when Herod replaced the Barras fortress on the north city wall with Fort Antonia? For the first time in the temple's history, the temple and the fortress were now connected, and it now had a western court. This blocked off access to the lower court from the north for herding the animals. New steps and tunnels would have to be built to bring the animals under and through the new western court. I'm inserting these drawings and a map to help explain this. Solomon's temple didn't connect to the city wall nor the fortress, so there was no problem herding the animals along a path to the west side of the lower court of the temple, as we can see with these yellow arrows. However, in Herod's temple, we can see there was a problem. I believe this is why the gates and tunnels were built. Warren and Barclay's gates are on the left side in this map and are a clue as to how this took place. The Mikveh gate was located on the east wall at the north end of the Nehemiah city wall, which was the inspector gate. Most likely the gate where the red heifer was brought in. Cattle and sheep didn't graze together in the pastures. The sheep and goats were brought in through the sheep gate, and the young bulls brought in from the east via the Mikveh gate. The animals would be herded through the strip of land between the fort and the temple to a specially made underground tunnel. Each tunnel begins with steps to get from this higher elevation down close to the level of Herod's first century street below. When the Herodians filled in the Tyropoeon Valley and built the new west wall, it added around 100 to 130 feet to both Fort Antonio and the temple. The Jews, who believed the temple was on the Dome of the Rock, built a small place of worship in this tunnel, believing Warren's tunnel was the closest they could get to the Holy of Holies, but the tunnel has now been walled up by the Muslims. This is Wilson's Arch, where the Jews have another synagogue, again believing it to be close to the Holy of Holies. Both Warren's Gate and Barclay's Gate have their thresholds above the first century street on a specially made path on the tops of the shops that line the west wall from Warren's Gate to the alley between the upper and lower courts. The first stop for the shepherds was Barclay Gate, where they entered the tunnel. Barclay's Gate is not accessible, but the tunnel steps and building that I call the barn, which we visited in the last video, are still in the ruins below the ground level of the Temple Mount today. The rest of the animals were taken down to the alleyway between the upper and lower court. It was located near Robinson's Arch. The young bulls would have been brought up through the small arched gate in this alleyway. There's steps going up still today. There was a second doorway also above the arched gate below, and I've made that into a storage room. These iron braces held up the roof above. It was made of concrete and iron rods. This part of the roof was actually the base of the floor of the kell above it. This opening would have opened up to Solomon's lower court, which also was located on Opal Hill. And as I said before, this alley was buried since 70 AD until excavated in the late 1990s. With these videos, I have now entered by the south gate, the west, and the east gates, and also investigated Fort Antonia. Amazing how much was contained in a small 600 by 1200 feet on the Temple Mount. I hope you have enjoyed this temple series of the Norma Robertson location, with the temple at the south end of the Temple Mount and on Opal Hill. Please visit TempleMountLocation.com or the YouTube channel Norma